Hey guys, here for a deck tech. We're going to be playing Grixis Control today in 4 rounds of sweet modern action. If you'll notice, this deck looks very similar to the one that Patrick Chapin played at Grand Prix Charlotte, the one that was hosted by StarCityGames just a month and some change ago, or maybe it was less than a month ago. There's too many tournaments. But this deck is a lot like the Splinter Twin decks we've been seeing over the last few months, where they have a lot of removal, a lot of card draw, and they use their graveyard as a really powerful resource. You know, with things like Snapcaster Mage, a lot of them have played Tasigur to delve, and they also usually play some number of Kolaghan's commands to make Snapcaster Mage just overly degenerate. But today we're going to be playing that in 4 rounds of Modern, and we're going to be going over the deck real quick before we get started. So, the original version, I honestly don't know exactly what the 75 was because I've toyed around with it so much, but I have it in a place where I am really liking it right now. So let's start with the removal spells. We have 4 copies of Lightning Bolt, 4 copies of Terminate, and 3 copies of Kolaghan's Command. And these spells are all very powerful answers to a lot of the format's creatures. Kolaghan's Command is particularly good with Snapcaster Mage because you can return the Snapcaster Mage with it, which allows you then to recast the Snapcaster Mage and flash Kolaghan's Command back. Kolaghan's Command is one of your best cards against a deck playing a lot of discard spells, such as Jund, Black-Green, or Abzan. And you know, it also has the added benefit of being able to destroy artifacts, so there are a lot of matchups where you get to 2-for-1 your opponent by killing their artifact and their creature or making them discard a card. The counter spells in the deck, there aren't many, which is a little strange to me. I mean, I say there are not many, but it's more so there's not as many as you would expect from a generic control deck in Modern. We have 2 spell snares and 2 dispels in the main deck. I've seen versions that have Thoughtseize main. I'm not a huge fan, but I do really like Spell Snare and Dispel for helping win counter battles in any sort of blue mirror match. Being able to Spell Snare a Snapcaster Mage or Spell Snare a Remand or Mana Leak from your opponent is pretty huge, and when you're fighting over a big spell, having a 1-mana counter spell is phenomenal. We have 2 Cryptic Commands to round out the top, and that's just mostly for value. A lot of the older versions played 3 copies of Cryptic Command, but I felt like I was getting a little too flooded with them, and I've been really in love with having only 2. Now the creatures in the deck, the newer additions that have started to see a lot more play in recent months are Tasigur the Golden Fang and Gurmag Angler. And the reason why we play a 2-2 split is because there are situations where one is better than the other, but we can't play too many of either one, or else it puts a little too much pressure on our graveyard, even with 4 copies of Thought Scour to help fill it up. Tasigur in a lot of spots against like Jund and the like, any deck with heavy removal, his ability is going to be able to get you a free card, and that's pretty good when your opponent has something like Liliana the Veil, because any card you get back is just going to be something you can discard to Tasigur. But at the same time, if you can delve your graveyard correctly or efficient, you know, just in the best way possible, you're going to be able to hopefully get back some more relevant card. So especially after sideboard, when you get to configure your deck how you want it and you don't have as many dead cards to get back. One reason why I didn't really like Tasigur out of the Splinter Twin decks is because you would very often just mill over a redundant Splinter Twin or a redundant creature combo piece, and your opponent would just give you that, and it didn't really do all that much. And so I found that Tasigur was not great in those decks. He's basically just a 1-mana 4/5, which is obviously good, but his ability is not that good in those decks, and it's much better in something like this deck. The card draw spells, we're playing 4 copies of Serum Visions and 4 copies of Thought Scour. Thought Scour is obviously worse than Serum Visions in most places, but Thought Scour is kind of like Dark Ritual sometimes for stuff like Gurmag and Tasigur. Mana base, we have 4 Sulphur Falls and 0 Creeping Tar Pits. That was mostly a conscious effort to make sure we had access to red mana on turn 2 that didn't deal damage to us, so that against a lot of decks we can cast things like Lightning Bolt or Terminate without having to take too much damage off of our shock lands. You could make the argument for something like Dark Slick Shores, but for the most part, I just wanted to play more copies of Sulphur Falls and no Tar Pit, so I'd have fewer lands that came into play tapped, while also dealing myself a little less damage. We have gone up to 23 total lands with a Singleton Desolate Lighthouse, which has been very powerful, especially in games where you're starting to flood a little bit. And this deck really wants to draw, I want to say, like a perfect number of lands. It can function off of 3 very well. Once it hits 4, it starts to get into overdrive. But the sweet spot really comes around like 5, 6, 7. But any land after that's just going to be useless. And the reason why you start functioning better off of 5, 6, and 7 is because then Snapcaster Mage becomes anything you want it to be. When you can do all the same things in one turn, where you go Kolaghan's Command, kill a guy, get back Snapcaster Mage, play Snapcaster Mage, and Lightning Bolt something, that's an insane turn. And those are the types of turns you want when you're trying to catch back up against some decks. We also have a Singleton Vendilion Click, which it's hit or miss, but it is an instant speed threat. I think one Vendilion Click is pretty great in any blue deck. Some people play 2, some people board 1. I just like the 1 of main and don't really fool around with extras after sideboard. Speaking of the sideboard, first thing you should point your eyes to is Dragon's Claw. This card, X4, is something that I just I'm sick of losing to burn decks. End of story. But it's a proactive thing you can put onto the board against burn, where sure, they can play Skullcrack or Tarka's Command, but you still gain the initial life off of that spell, and that deck plays so few lands that it's unlikely they're going to be able to cast Skullcrack or Tarka's Command and then another spell on the same turn, or at least like more than one, so their anti-life gain effect is not really going to do all that much against your Dragon's Claw. 4 copies of Fulminator Mage to give us some game against Tron and Amulet Bloom and decks like that, but there are some matchups where you want to bring it in and you start to blow up your opponent's lands, get back Fulminator Mage with Kolaghan's Command while also making them discard a card, and you really just attrition them out with Kolaghan's Command in that regard. But those times are few and far between, but when you do it, it feels pretty gross, and it feels pretty good for us. We have Singleton Deprive and another Dispel as extra counter spells for any sort of blue mirror. Deprive is also very good against combo decks, and since your deck can function off of so few lands, the bouncing of a land is not all that detrimental. The double blue is actually a little more restrictive than I would like, since we do have a Swamp, a Mountain, a Blood Crypt, and a Desolate Lighthouse, but you're almost always able to cast Deprive and another blue card. There aren't very many games where you can't cast Cryptic Command, and those are going to be about the same games where you go Deprive plus Dispel or Deprive plus Mana Leak or something like that. For any of the really grindy matchups, we have 2 copies of Keranos, which I think is industry standard at this point. He is just the best threat for the mana cost, and he's going to get the job done most of the time by himself if he comes into play. Unlike other blue-red based control decks or Splinter Twin or whatever, not all of them have Kolaghan's Command, so even if your opponent is able to Thoughtseize your Keranos, you still have the ability to get it back later in the game with a Kolaghan's Command, which is phenomenal. 2 Pyroclasms and an Izzet Staticaster to come in against creature-based decks where these things kill stuff. I really like Izzet Staticaster mainly for Infect, but it also has a lot of play against other decks in the format. The Elf, I don't know what they call it, Green-White Elves or Elf Company or whatever that won Grand Prix Charlotte. It's really good against that deck since they have so many X1 creatures. It can also come in against things like Merfolk. I even bring it in against opposing Splinter Twin decks sometimes, because having a creature that comes into play can kill a Snapcaster Mage or a Vendilion Click, and then they have to kill it before they can play something else, has been pretty sweet. Staticaster plus Lightning Bolt also kills Exarch, which is something to note as well. Anyway, guys, that is going to be the deck tech for Grixis Control. Let's go ahead and get to the matches.